The morning sun streamed through the wide windows of Gateway International Airport, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Captain James Wilson wheeled his flight bag behind him, nodding to familiar faces as he made his way toward the crew lounge. After 15 years flying commercial jets, the airport felt like a second home. James checked his watch. Still an hour before pre-flight checks. Perfect timing for coffee and a quick review of today's flight plan. He'd be taking a Boeing 737 to Chicago, a route he could practically fly with his eyes closed. Not that he ever would. James prided himself on his spotless safety record. "Morning, Captain," called out the barista at the airport coffee shop. "The usual?" "You know it, Diane," James replied with a smile. "Black, no sugar." Cup in hand, James continued through the terminal, taking a shortcut through a quieter hallway that connected to the operations area. As he rounded a corner, something caught his eye. A figure moving near the maintenance hangars, an area that required security clearance. James paused, squinting through the glass partition. It was a young black boy, maybe 11 or 12 years old, wandering alone where passengers shouldn't be. The boy wore jeans and a blue hoodie, carrying what looked like a tablet in his hands, seemingly absorbed in whatever was on the screen. James felt a prickle of concern. In the post-9/11 world, airport security was no joke. Kids didn't just wander into restricted areas. Something felt off. He hesitated, finger hovering over the direct line to airport security on his phone. Then he thought about the security briefing last month. "If you see something, say something." The words echoed in his mind, along with statistics about security breaches. Better safe than sorry, right? But instead of calling airport security, James made a split-second decision that would change many lives. He dialed the local police. "This is Captain James Wilson at Gateway International Airport," he said quietly into the phone, keeping his eyes on the boy. "I'm reporting a suspicious individual in a restricted area near Hangar C. Young male, approximately 12 years old. No visible ID badge or escort." "A child?" the dispatcher asked, sounding surprised. "Yes, but he's in a secure zone," James insisted. "No one that age should be back there without proper clearance and supervision." "We'll send officers right away," the dispatcher replied after a brief pause. "Please don't approach the individual yourself." James ended the call, feeling a mix of satisfaction and unease. He was doing his duty, wasn't he? Airport security was everyone's responsibility. Still, a small voice in the back of his mind wondered if he'd overreacted. Maybe the kid was just lost. Maybe he should have approached him directly or called airport security instead. But it was too late now. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled up outside the hangar area, their lights flashing but sirens silent. 4 officers emerged, moving, with purpose toward the maintenance area. James watched from his position near the glass partition, coffee forgotten in his hand. The boy hadn't moved much, still focused on his tablet. He seemed completely unaware of the approaching officers. James felt his stomach tighten. The situation suddenly felt all wrong. He hadn't expected such a strong response. Through the glass, he could see one officer speaking into his radio, while the others spread out, approaching the boy from different angles. Standard procedure for cornering a suspect, not for helping a lost child. The boy finally noticed the officers. His body language changed instantly, shoulders tensing, taking a step back. One of the officers had his hand resting on his holster. James felt sick. "Hey!" he heard an officer shout through the glass. "You! Stop right there!" The boy froze, his tablet clutched to his chest. Even from a distance, James could see the fear on his face. James pushed through the door into the hangar area, his captain's ID badge giving him access. "Officers," he called out. "I'm the one who reported." But they weren't listening to him. They were focused entirely on the boy, who was now backing away, shaking his head. "I'm just waiting for my dad." The boy's voice carried across the space, higher pitched with fear. "He works here. He told me to wait." "ID," demanded the tallest officer. "Let's see some identification." "I'm 12, the boy replied, his voice steady despite his obvious fear. I don't have ID. My dad is in a meeting. Put the device down slowly, another officer instructed, cutting him off. By now, airport workers had begun to gather at the edges of the scene. A mechanic in overalls frowned, whispering to his colleague. A flight attendant covered her mouth in shock. James felt increasingly uncomfortable as the witness count grew. The boy carefully placed his tablet on the ground, as instructed. Can I call my dad? Please? He can explain everything. The officers exchanged glances. The apparent leader nodded slightly. Slowly. No sudden movements. With trembling hands, the boy pulled out a phone from his pocket. As he dialed, tears welled in his eyes, but he blinked them back, determined to stay composed. Dad? His voice cracked slightly. There are police officers here. They say I'm not supposed to be waiting here. Can you come? Please? James couldn't hear the response, but the boy's relief was visible. Okay, yes, I'll stay right here. One of the airport security personnel finally arrived, looking confused at the police presence. What's going on? We didn't call this in. Suspicious person in a restricted area, the lead officer explained. Captain over there reported it. He gestured toward James, who felt a flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. The security officer looked at the boy, then back at the police. Did anyone check if he has a visitor pass? A heavy silence fell. The boy, hearing this, slowly turned around, pointing to a visitor badge clipped to the back of his hoodie. It was partially obscured, but clearly official. My dad clipped it there, so I wouldn't lose it, he explained quietly. I'm supposed to stay in the waiting area by his office, but I walked a little too far looking for the vending machines. James felt his heart sink. The boy had authorization all along. He'd had a simple, innocent explanation, and James had called the police instead of simply asking him if he was lost. The mood shifted perceptibly. The officers relaxed their postures slightly, though they remained official. The airport security officer stepped forward. What's your father's name, son? The boy stood straighter, a hint of pride breaking through his fear. Dr. Anthony Parker. He's the new FAA administrator for this region. James felt the blood drain from his face. The Federal Aviation Administration, the government, body that regulated every aspect of his career as a pilot, and he'd just called the police on the administrator's son. The airport security officer's eyes widened. Dr. Parker, from the Washington office, he's here for the quarterly safety review. Yes, sir, the boy nodded. That's my dad. The lead police officer cleared his throat, suddenly looking uncomfortable. Well, let's just wait for your father to clear this up, shall we? James stood frozen, watching as airport staff whispered among themselves. His fellow pilots would hear about this. The airline would hear about this. His coffee had gone cold in his hand, forgotten completely. Through the growing crowd, a tall man in a crisp suit pushed his way forward, walking with the confident stride of someone used to authority. His face was tight with concern and barely contained anger. James knew instantly who he was, even before the boy's face lit up with relief. Dad, the boy called out. The FAA administrator had arrived, and Captain James Wilson knew, with absolute certainty, that he had made a terrible mistake, one that would have consequences far beyond what he could imagine. Dr. Anthony Parker moved with purpose, his polished shoes clicking against the hangar floor. The whispers among the growing crowd fell silent as he approached. His son ran to him, and Dr. Parker placed a protective arm around the boy's shoulders. What's happening here? Dr. Parker asked, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of authority that made everyone stand a little straighter. The lead officer stepped forward. Sir, we received a call about an unauthorized person in a restricted area. We were just following protocol. Dr. Parker's gaze swept over the four officers, the airport security personnel, and finally landed on Captain James Wilson, who stood awkwardly clutching his cold coffee. My son has a visitor badge, Dr. Parker said, turning the boy slightly, to show the badge clipped to his hoodie. He was instructed to wait in the designated area while I finished my meeting with the safety board. He may have wandered a bit looking for a vending machine, but he's hardly a security threat. James felt smaller with each passing second. The other pilots and airport staff watching the scene unfold were now looking at him with a mix of confusion and disapproval. "I apologize for the misunderstanding, Dr. Parker," the airport security officer said quickly. "Your son did nothing wrong. The police were called directly by—" He glanced uncomfortably at James. Dr. Parker followed his gaze. "And you are?" James swallowed hard. "Captain James Wilson, sir. I'm the one who called the police. I saw your son near the restricted area and I thought it was suspicious." "Suspicious?" Dr. Parker repeated, his eyebrow raising. "You saw a child and instead of asking if he needed help, you called armed officers?" The question hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. James had no good answer. Looking at the situation now through Dr. Parker's eyes, his decision seemed not just unnecessary but potentially dangerous. "I was following security protocols," James said weakly. "If you see something, say something." "And what exactly did you see, Captain?" Dr. Parker pressed, his voice still measured but with an edge that cut like a knife. "Because what I see is my 12-year-old son being surrounded by police, officers with their hands on their weapons." One of the officers shifted uncomfortably, moving his hand away from his holster. "Dad, it's okay," the boy said quietly, tugging at his father's sleeve. "I'm fine. Can we just go?" Dr. Parker looked down at his son, his expression softening momentarily. "In a minute, Ty. This is important." He turned back to the officers. "I'd like your names and badge numbers, please, and I'll need a copy of the incident report." The lead officer nodded, pulling out a small notebook. "Of course, sir. We'll make sure you get everything." James took a step forward. "Dr. Parker, I sincerely apologize. I didn't mean to cause—" "Not now, Captain." Dr. Parker cut him off. "I have a frightened child to take care of first. We can discuss your decision-making process later." The dismissal stung, but James knew he deserved it. He watched as Dr. Parker spoke quietly to the security officer, likely arranging for the incident report. By now, a small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance. James recognized his co-pilot for today's flight, Lisa Chen, watching with a frown. When their eyes met, she gave him a look that clearly said, "What were you thinking?" He wasn't sure he knew anymore. The police officers were talking among themselves, their earlier authoritative postures now deflated. One of them, the youngest of the group, kept glancing at Ty with unmistakable regret in his eyes. James felt a tap on his shoulder and turned to find Diane from the coffee shop. "What happened?" she whispered. "Everyone's saying you called the cops on the FAA guy's kid?" James winced. "News travels fast." "It's an airport," Diane replied with a shrug. "Gossip moves at supersonic speeds here." Before James could respond, Lisa approached them. "Captain, we have pre-flight in 20 minutes. Are you going to be able to fly today, or should I request a replacement?" The question was like a bucket of cold water. His mistake could affect his flight schedule, his job. "I'll be there," James said firmly. "This situation is unfortunate, but it won't affect my performance." Lisa didn't look convinced. "The chief pilot might want to hear about this before we take off." "Then tell him," James said, his professional pride wounded but his sense of responsibility intact. "But I'm capable of flying safely." Lisa nodded once and walked away. James turned back to the scene with Dr. Parker, only to find that the FAA administrator was now looking directly at him. Their eyes met across the distance, and James felt a chill run down his spine. Dr. Parker's expression wasn't angry, which somehow made it worse. It was evaluating, measuring, like James was a safety risk being assessed. Dr. Parker whispered something to his son, then walked purposefully toward James. The crowd around them pretended not to watch, but everyone was listening. "Captain Wilson," Dr. Parker said, stopping a few feet away. "I'd like a word." James nodded, straightening his posture out of habit. "Yes, sir." "Not here," Dr. Parker said. "My office. After your flight returns today, 4 o'clock. It wasn't a request. James nodded again. "I'll be there." Dr. Parker studied him for a moment longer, Do you have children, Captain Wilson? The question caught James off guard. No, sir. Then perhaps you can't fully understand what just happened here, Dr. Parker said quietly. But I hope by this afternoon you'll have given it some thought. With that, he turned and walked back to his son. Together, they left the hangar area, Ty staying close to his father's side. The police officers dispersed shortly after, and the airport security personnel began shooing away the lingering onlookers. James stood alone, the cold coffee still in his hand. He finally walked to a trash can and dropped the cup inside. "Rough morning?" asked a mechanic who was packing up his tools nearby. "You could say that," James replied. "For what it's worth," the mechanic said, not looking up from his toolbox. "I probably would have just asked the kid if he was lost." The simple statement hit James harder than any direct criticism. The mechanic was right. Why hadn't he just approached the boy? Asked if he needed help? What had stopped him? An uncomfortable answer began to form in the back of his mind, but he pushed it away. He had a flight to prepare for, passengers depending on him. He couldn't afford to be distracted. As he walked toward the pre-flight briefing room, James could feel eyes on him. The story was spreading. By tomorrow, everyone at the airport would know. Captain Wilson, the pilot who called the police on a black child who turned out to be the FAA administrator's son. Lisa was waiting for him outside the briefing room, her expression professional but cool. "The chief wants to see you after our return flight, before your meeting with Dr. Parker." James nodded. "I expected as much." "What happened out there, James?" Lisa asked, lowering her voice. "That wasn't like you." "I thought I was following protocol," James said. But the excuse sounded hollow even to his own ears. "We both know there are protocols and then there's common sense," Lisa replied. "You've been flying long enough to know the difference." Before James could respond, the door opened, and the rest of the crew arrived for the briefing. The flight attendants greeted them with smiles that faltered slightly when they looked at James. Word had reached them too. Throughout the briefing, James maintained his professional demeanor, reviewing the flight plan, weather conditions, and passenger count with his usual thoroughness. But his mind kept drifting back to the hangar, to Ty's frightened face when the officers surrounded him, to Dr. Parker's measured words. "Do you have children, Captain Wilson?" As they walked to the aircraft, Lisa fell into step beside him. "You need to be 100% present up there today, James. If you're not, tell me now." James appreciated her directness. As his first officer, Lisa needed to trust his judgment. Right now, he couldn't blame her for questioning it. "I'm good," he assured her. "What happened this morning stays on the ground. In the air, I'm the same pilot I've always been." Lisa studied his face, then nodded. "Okay, but if that changes..." "It won't," James said firmly. The pre-flight checks went smoothly, each procedure a familiar comfort in a day that had gone sideways. As passengers boarded, James focused on his instruments, his checklists, his communications with the tower. But as their Boeing 737 lifted into the clear blue sky, banking gently toward Chicago, James couldn't fully escape his thoughts. Below him, growing smaller by the second, was Gateway International Airport, where in just a few hours he would have to face both his chief pilot and Dr. Parker. And beyond those meetings loomed larger questions, ones he wasn't sure he was ready to answer. Why had he seen a threat instead of a child? Why had he called the police instead of offering help? What assumptions had guided his decision? The questions followed him into the clouds, as persistent as his own shadow. By the time he landed in Chicago, he would need answers, not just for Dr. Parker and the chief pilot, but for himself. The flight to Chicago and back passed in a blur for James. Despite his promise to Lisa that he'd be fully present, his mind kept drifting back to Gateway Airport, to the look on Ty's face when surrounded by police officers, to the measured calm of Dr. Parker as he'd said, "My office. 4 o'clock. As the plane touched down on the return flight, James felt a knot forming in his stomach. He'd spent the journey rehearsing what he would say to both the chief pilot and Dr. Parker, but every explanation he came up with sounded hollow, even to himself. Lisa gave him a sideways glance as they completed the shutdown checklist. "Good flight," she said simply. "Thanks," James replied, grateful for the small acknowledgement. "And thanks for having my back today." Lisa paused, her hand hovering over the last switch. "I always have your back in the cockpit, James. That's my job. But what happened this morning?" She shook her head. "You need to make that right." "No," James said quietly. "I'm trying to figure out how." The terminal was bustling with the usual afternoon activity when they disembarked. James checked his watch. 3:15 p.m. 45 minutes until his meeting with Dr. Parker, but first the chief pilot wanted to see him. James made his way to the airline's operations office, where Chief Pilot Richard Thompson was waiting, his face set in the stern expression that had earned him the nickname Thundercloud among the flight crews. "Wilson," Thompson said by way of greeting, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. "Sit." James sat back straight, hands resting on his knees. "I've got the preliminary incident report," Thompson said, tapping a folder on his desk. "Want to tell me your version before I read the official one?" James took a deep breath. "I was walking to the crew lounge this morning and saw a young boy in a restricted area near Hangar C. He was alone, no visible escort. James hesitated. "I called the police directly instead of approaching him or contacting airport security." "Why?" Thompson asked, his bushy eyebrows drawing together. The simple question hung in the air. James had been asking himself the same thing all day. "I thought I was following security protocols," he said finally. Thompson leaned back in his chair. "We both know that's not the whole story, Wilson. In 15 years, you've never bypassed proper channels to call outside law enforcement for a security issue. Why start today? Why not call airport security?" James looked down at his hands. "I saw a threat where there wasn't one. And why do you think that is?" Thompson pressed, his voice surprisingly gentle. The question hit James like a physical blow. Deep down he knew the answer, but saying it out loud made it real. "Because..." James struggled to find the words. "Because I made assumptions based on how he looked." Thompson nodded slowly. "The boy is black. You're not. That played a role here, didn't it?" James wanted to deny it, to defend himself, but he couldn't. Not honestly. "I think it did," he admitted, the words leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. "I didn't even realize it until afterward." Thompson sighed heavily. "This isn't just about you embarrassing the airline by calling the cops on an FAA administrator's son, though that's bad enough. This is about judgment, Wilson. A pilot's most valuable asset is good judgment." "I know," James said quietly. "I made a mistake." "A mistake that could have had serious consequences," Thompson replied. "Those officers had their hands on their weapons approaching a 12-year-old boy. Think about that." James had been thinking about little else all day. The image was burned into his memory. Thompson opened the folder and scanned its contents. "Dr. Parker hasn't filed a formal complaint yet, but he's requested this meeting with you and I've approved it." He closed the folder. "After you speak with him, I want you to take 3 days of personal leave. When you come back, you'll participate in our renewed cultural awareness training program." James nodded, accepting the mild discipline without protest. "Yes, sir." "This isn't a punishment, Wilson," Thompson said, his tone softening slightly. "It's an opportunity to reflect and learn. You're a good pilot, one of our best. But today, your judgment was compromised by something you need to address." "I understand," James said, feeling a mix of shame and gratitude for Thompson's directness. "Good." Thompson stood. "Dr. Parker is in the conference room down the hall. He's waiting for you." James checked his watch again. 3:45 p.m. "I thought the meeting was at 4. Thompson gave him a wry smile. "In the aviation world, if you're not early, you're late, you know that." James stood, straightening his uniform jacket. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," Thompson replied. "You still have to face the man whose son you frightened today. And Wilson?" His expression grew serious again. Listen more than you speak in there. With those words of advice echoing in his mind, James made his way to the conference room. Through the glass panel in the door, he could see Dr. Parker sitting at the table reviewing documents. Taking a deep breath, James knocked lightly and entered. Dr. Parker looked up, his expression unreadable. "Captain Wilson, please, have a seat." James sat across from him, noting the formal setting. This wasn't going to be a casual conversation. "How is your son?" James asked, genuinely concerned. Dr. Parker seemed mildly surprised by the question. Shaken, but resilient. He's had to be. Something in the way he said those last words made James's heart sink further. "I want to apologize," James began, "for my actions this morning. There's no excuse for—" Dr. Parker held up a hand, stopping him. "Before we get to apologies, I'd like to understand what happened. Walk me through your thought process." James hesitated, then nodded. "I was heading to the crew lounge when I saw Ty near the maintenance hangars. He was alone looking at a tablet. My first thought was that it was unusual to see a child in that area. And then," Dr. Parker prompted, James struggled to articulate what had gone through his mind in those crucial moments. "I felt something was wrong. Instead of approaching him or calling airport security, I called the police directly." "Why?" Dr. Parker asked, echoing Thompson's earlier question. James met his gaze. "At the time, I told myself it was because of security protocols. If you see something, say something. But looking back, I think I saw Ty as more of a threat than I would have if he were white," Dr. Parker finished for him, his voice calm but firm. James felt the weight of the truth settle on his shoulders. "Yes," he admitted. "I didn't consciously think that, but I believe that's what happened." Dr. Parker studied him for a long moment. "Do you know what my son said to me after the incident this morning?" James shook his head. He said, "Dad, I didn't do anything wrong." Dr. Parker's composed demeanor cracked slightly, revealing the parent beneath the professional exterior. "He's 12 years old, Captain Wilson. He shouldn't have to defend his right to exist in a space." "No, he shouldn't," James agreed quietly. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened," Dr. Parker continued. "It's just the first time it's happened since I became the FAA administrator." The implication was clear. Ty had faced similar situations before, but without the protection his father's position now afforded him. "I'm truly sorry," James said, the words feeling inadequate. Dr. Parker leaned forward. "I don't doubt your sincerity, Captain. But this isn't just about an apology, it's about understanding." He pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "Do you know what this is?" James glanced at the label. "Gateway International Airport Security Protocols." "Page 15, Dr. Parker instructed. James opened the folder and turned to the specified page. It detailed the proper procedures for reporting security concerns within the airport. "Read the highlighted section," Dr. Parker said. James read aloud. "Personnel observing unusual activity or unauthorized persons in restricted areas should first contact airport security at extension 7700 or through the airport communication system. Outside law enforcement should only be contacted in case of immediate danger to life or property." He looked up, the full weight of his procedural violation now clear. "You bypassed airport security entirely," Dr. Parker said. "Why?" "I can't justify it," James admitted. "I made a series of poor decisions based on bias I didn't recognize I had." Dr. Parker nodded slowly. "That's a start, Captain. Recognizing the problem." He took the folder back and returned it to his briefcase. "I'm not filing a formal complaint against you or your airline. I believe in addressing the root causes of incidents like this, not just punishing individuals." James felt a rush of relief, followed quickly by confusion. "Thank you, but why not?" "Because punishment doesn't solve the underlying issue," Dr. Parker replied. "And because my son asked me not to." James blinked in surprise. "He did?" Ty is remarkably compassionate, Dr. Parker said, a hint of pride in his voice. He said everyone makes mistakes and he hopes you learn from this one. The simple wisdom and forgiveness from a 12-year-old boy hit James harder than any disciplinary action could have. I'd like to apologize to him directly, James said. If that's appropriate. Doctor, Parker considered this. Perhaps, but not today. He's had enough for one day. He checked his watch. I have another meeting shortly, but before I go, I want to be clear about something, Captain Wilson. James nodded, waiting. What happened today is part of a larger pattern, Dr. Parker said. My son has been questioned, followed, and viewed with suspicion simply because of how he looks. Today it was you. Tomorrow, it might be someone else. The difference is, now I'm in a position to do something about it on a systemic level. What do you mean? James asked. Dr. Parker stood, gathering his belongings. I'm implementing a comprehensive review of security training across all airports under my jurisdiction, with a specific focus on recognizing and addressing implicit bias. He looked directly at James. And I'd like you to be part of that effort. James was stunned. Me? But I'm the one who… Precisely, Dr. Parker cut in. You're an experienced pilot with a previously spotless record who made a serious error in judgment today. Your perspective could be valuable in helping others recognize their own blind spots. James didn't know what to say. The offer was unexpected and humbling. Think about it, Dr. Parker said, extending his hand. Your chief pilot has already agreed to make you available for the program if you choose to participate. James stood and shook his hand. Thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Parker. I'll definitely consider it. As Dr. Parker turned to leave, James found his voice again. Sir, please tell him I'm sorry and that he was right. Everyone does make mistakes, and I'm learning from this one. Dr. Parker paused at the door, a small smile crossing his face for the first time. I'll tell him. Good afternoon, Captain Wilson. As the door closed behind him, James remained standing, feeling as though something fundamental had shifted inside him. The conversation hadn't gone at all as he'd expected. Instead of anger and punishment, he'd found accountability and an unexpected path forward. James gathered himself and left the conference room, heading toward the exit. His 3 days of leave started now. 3 days to reflect on what had happened, why it had happened, and what he was going to do about it. As he stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, James realized that the hardest conversation still lay ahead, the one he needed to have with himself. The 3 days of leave stretched before James like an unfamiliar landscape. Without the structure of his flight schedule, he found himself adrift, his thoughts repeatedly circling back to the incident at the airport. On the first morning, he woke early out of habit, made coffee, and sat at his kitchen table staring at the steam rising from his mug. His apartment felt unusually quiet. Normally, he'd be reviewing flight plans or checking weather patterns. Today, he had nowhere to be, nothing to distract him from the uncomfortable thoughts that had been shadowing him since his conversation with Dr. Parker. James opened his laptop and typed implicit bias into the search bar. The results filled his screen: articles, studies, training programs. He clicked on the first link and began to read. Hours passed as he moved from one resource to another. Some of what he read made him defensive. Other parts resonated uncomfortably. By afternoon, his eyes were tired, but his mind was racing. His phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. How are you holding up? He appreciated her reaching out. Still, processing, he typed back. Doing some reading. Good, came her reply. The crew's asking about you. Most of them are on your side. James frowned at that. There shouldn't be sides, he wrote. I made a mistake. Lisa's response took longer this time. True, but owning it puts you ahead of most people. It was small comfort, but James appreciated the sentiment. He closed his laptop and decided to take a walk, needing fresh air and movement, to clear his head. The neighborhood park was busy with afternoon activity. Children playing, people walking dogs, an elderly couple sitting on a bench feeding birds. James found an empty bench and sat, watching the scene unfold around him. A group of kids were playing basketball on the court nearby. Among them was a boy about Ty's age, laughing as he dribbled past his friends. James found himself wondering if Ty was playing somewhere today, if he still felt safe in public spaces after what happened. The thought sat heavy in his chest. One moment, one decision based on unconscious assumptions, and he'd potentially changed how a child viewed the world around him. How many other children had similar experiences? How many other well-meaning people like himself made similar mistakes without ever recognizing them? As the sun began to set, James walked home, his steps slower than when he'd left. The weight of realization was setting in, not just about the incident itself, but about the larger pattern it represented, a pattern he'd been part of without even knowing it. The second day of his leave dawned rainy and gray. James spent the morning on the phone with his sister in Seattle, telling her about what had happened. "Oh, James," she sighed after he finished. "That poor boy." "I know," James said, rubbing his forehead. "I keep thinking about what could have happened. If things had escalated, but they didn't," his sister reminded him. "And now you have a chance to make something positive come from this." "Dr. Parker wants me to help with some kind of training program," James told her, "to share my perspective." "Are you going to do it?" James hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm qualified. I'm the one who messed up." "That's exactly why you're qualified," his sister replied. "You recognized what happened. You're willing to talk about it. That's rare, James." After they hung up, her words stayed with him. Was she right? Could his mistake actually be valuable if it helped prevent others from making the same one? By afternoon, the rain had stopped. James put on his running shoes and headed out, needing to burn off some of the restless energy that had been building inside him. As he ran, pushing himself harder than usual, his mind kept returning to Ty's face when the officers surrounded him, the fear in his eyes, the way he'd tried to stay composed despite that fear. James stopped, hands on his knees, breathing hard. A memory surfaced. Himself at 12, lost in a shopping mall, frightened until a security guard had approached him with a kind smile, asked if he needed help, and calmly walked him to the information desk to find his mother. No one had called the police on him. No one had treated him like a threat. The contrast was stark and undeniable. When he returned home, sweaty and tired, James made a decision. He emailed Chief Pilot Thompson. "I'd like to accept Dr. Parker's offer to participate in the training program." Thompson's reply came quickly. "Good. I'll let him know. Report to Training Center B next Monday at 0800. That night, James dreamed of flying, but instead of the usual sensation of freedom, he felt trapped in the cockpit, watching something unfold. Below that, he was powerless to stop. The third day of leave was the hardest. With his decision made, James found himself imagining the training program, wondering what he would say, how he would explain his actions to a room full of colleagues. The prospect was daunting. His doorbell rang mid-morning, surprising him. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door, Lisa stood there holding a paper bag. "Brought you some of those muffins you like from the airport bakery," she said by way of greeting. "Can I come in?" James stepped aside, genuinely glad to see her. "What are you doing here? Don't you have a flight to Denver today?" "Got switched to tomorrow," Lisa said, placing the bag on his counter. "Thought I'd check on you." They sat at his small kitchen table, coffee mugs in hand. Lisa had been his first officer for 3 years now, but they'd rarely spent time together outside of work. "So," she said after a moment, "I heard you're joining Parker's training program." News really did travel at supersonic speeds in the aviation community. Word gets around fast. "It's a good move," Lisa said, surprising him. "Brave, actually." James shook his head. "Not brave. Necessary." "Both," Lisa insisted. "Do you know what the other pilots are saying? Half of them think you're being thrown under the bus to make the airline look good. The other half are just glad it wasn't them who made the call." "But that's just it," James said, feeling a surge of frustration. None of them are asking why I made that call in the first place, why I saw a black child and immediately thought, threat instead of kid who might need help. Lisa studied him over the rim of her coffee mug. And have you figured out the answer to that? James sighed. I'm working on it. I've been doing a lot of reading these past couple days about implicit bias, systemic patterns, the experiences of Black Americans with law enforcement. He ran, a hand through his hair. It's been eye-opening, I bet, Lisa said. After a pause, she added, You know, my brother-in-law is Black. He's a doctor. He still gets stopped by security when he enters his own hospital through the doctor's entrance sometimes. James winced. That's wrong, Lisa finished for him, but it happens all the time. My sister says he has the talk with their son every few months, not about sex, about how to act around police and authority figures. Ty probably had that talk too, James said quietly, the realization hitting him anew. Probably, Lisa agreed. Look, James, what you did wasn't right, but the fact that you're actually examining why you did it puts you ahead of most people. Some would just get defensive or make excuses. I thought about it, James admitted. It would be easier to say I was just following protocol, that anyone would have done the same thing. But that wouldn't be true. They talked for another hour, finishing the muffins and a second pot of coffee. When Lisa left, promising to catch up after her Denver flight, James felt better than he had in days. Not absolved, he didn't deserve that yet, but less alone with his thoughts. That evening, he sat down and wrote an email to Dr. Parker. I've accepted the offer to participate in the training program. I want to thank you for the opportunity to turn my mistake into something constructive. I've spent these past few days reflecting and educating myself, and while I know that's just the beginning, I'm committed to continuing this journey. If it's still appropriate, I would like to apologize to Ty directly at some point, but I completely understand if that's not possible or desired. He hesitated before hitting send, then added, Your son's wisdom and compassion are a credit to your parenting. I hope one day he'll know that his experience, difficult as it was, helped create positive change. James sent the email, then closed his laptop. Tomorrow he would return to the airport, back to his routine of pre-flight checks, weather reports, and passenger announcements. But something had changed within him, a fundamental shift in perspective that he knew would affect every decision moving forward. As he prepared for bed, his phone chimed with a new email notification. It was from Dr. Parker, a brief reply. Thank you, Captain Wilson. See you Monday. As for Ty, we'll discuss the possibility when the time is right. He's asked about you, which I take as a positive sign. James read the message twice, feeling a small knot in his chest loosen slightly. It wasn't forgiveness that would take time and actions, not just words, but it was an opening, a possibility that something constructive might emerge from his mistake. Outside his window, a plane's lights blinked across the night sky, following its predetermined path with precision and care. James watched until it disappeared from view, thinking about paths and patterns, about how they could be changed with awareness and intention. Tomorrow, he would return to the skies, but he would do so as a changed man, one who had begun to see not just the vast horizon ahead, but the blind spots that had limited his vision for too long. 3 months passed quickly. Spring turned to summer, bringing longer days and the busier travel season to Gateway International Airport. For James, the time had been transformative in ways he couldn't have imagined that fateful morning when he'd made the call that changed so many lives, including his own. The training center buzzed with activity as James checked his watch. It was nearly 9 o'clock and people were filing into the large conference room for the final session of Dr. Parker's new initiative, recognizing and addressing implicit bias in aviation security. James stood near the podium, reviewing his notes one last time. After 12 weeks of development, today marked the official launch of the program that would eventually be implemented at airports across the country. His stomach fluttered with nerves, but there was something else too, a sense of purpose that had been growing steadily during the months of work with Dr. Parker and his team. Nervous? Asked Kelly Rodriguez, one of the human resources specialists who had helped develop the curriculum. James smiled wryly. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's seen you review those same notes 15 times already, Kelly replied. You'll be fine. Your section of the presentation is the most powerful part of the whole program. That's what worries me, James admitted. I don't want to mess it up. The door opened and Dr. Parker entered, deep in conversation with Chief Pilot Thompson. They nodded in James's direction before taking seats in the front row. James took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. Over the past 3 months, he'd come to know Dr. Parker beyond their initial unfortunate meeting. They'd worked closely on the training program, with James providing his perspective as both a pilot and as someone who had recognized his own implicit biases. The professional relationship had been tentative at first, understandably strained by the incident with Ty, but over time, a cautious mutual respect had developed. Speaking of Ty, James had met with him just once, about 6 weeks after the incident. The meeting had been brief but significant, a chance for James to apologize directly and for Ty to ask the questions that had been on his mind. The boy's maturity had been striking, his forgiveness humbling. It starts in 5 minutes, Kelly reminded him, interrupting his thoughts. I'll go make sure the video is queued up correctly. James nodded, watching as the room continued to fill. There were pilots, flight attendants, gate agents, security personnel, mechanics, and administrators from various airlines and airport departments. Many faces he recognized, some he didn't. All would soon hear his story. At precisely 9 o'clock, Dr. Parker approached the podium, his presence commanding immediate attention from the room. Good morning, he began, his deep voice carrying easily. Thank you all for being here for this important launch. What we're undertaking today isn't just another training program. It's the beginning of a fundamental shift in how we approach security in our aviation system. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. 3 months ago, an incident occurred at this very airport that highlighted the urgent need for this initiative. Many of you have heard about it. Some of you witnessed it. Today, you'll hear the full story from those directly involved, and together, we'll explore how we can learn from it. Dr. Parker gestured toward James. I'd like to introduce Captain James Wilson, who has been instrumental in developing this program. Captain Wilson brings a unique perspective, one that I believe will resonate with many of you. James approached the podium, the weight of all eyes in the room pressing upon him. He'd rehearsed his speech countless times, but standing there now, he decided to set his notes aside. This story needed to come from the heart. 3 months ago, he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. I made a decision that I've replayed in my mind every day since. I saw a young boy near a restricted area of this airport, and instead of approaching him to offer help, instead of calling airport security, I called the police. The room was silent, everyone's attention fixed on him. That boy was 12 years old. He was waiting for his father, who happened to be Dr. Parker. James gestured toward Dr. Parker, who nodded slightly. But at that moment, I didn't see a child who might need assistance. I saw a threat, and I have had to ask myself why. James took a breath, gathering his courage. The answer was uncomfortable but undeniable. I made assumptions based on how that boy looked, specifically because he was black. A few people shifted in their seats, but no one spoke. I'm not sharing this to make myself look noble for admitting a mistake, James continued. I'm sharing it because I know I'm not alone. We all carry biases that we may not even recognize. Unconscious patterns of thought that can lead to harmful actions, even when our conscious intentions are good. For the next 15 minutes, James walked the audience through that day. His thought process, his actions, the consequences, and most importantly, what he had learned in the aftermath. He spoke about the research he'd done, the conversations he'd had, and the realizations that had changed his perspective. What I've come to understand, he said, approaching the conclusion of his talk, is that security isn't just about identifying threats. It's about protecting people, all people, while treating them with dignity and respect. When we let bias cloud our judgment, we don't make anyone safer. In fact, we create new dangers. James glanced at Dr. Parker, who gave him an encouraging nod. I'm grateful to Dr. Parker for turning what could have been simply a disciplinary incident into an opportunity for growth and systemic change. And I'm honored to be part of this program, which I believe will make our airports not only safer but more just. As James stepped back from the podium, the room remained silent for a moment, before breaking into applause. He returned to his seat, feeling lighter somehow, as if sharing his story had lifted some of the weight he'd been carrying. Dr. Parker took the podium again. Thank you, Captain Wilson, for your honesty and courage. He turned to address the room. Now I'd like to introduce someone else who has been instrumental in shaping this program, though in a very different way. My son, Ty. A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience as Ty Parker walked in from a side door, looking both nervous and determined. At 12, soon to be 13, he seemed small behind the podium, but his voice was clear and strong. Hi everyone, he began. My dad asked if I would be willing to talk to you today about what happened to me at the airport a few months ago, and what I think about this new training program. Ty glanced at his notes, then up at the audience. When those police officers surrounded me that day, I was really scared. I kept thinking I must have done something wrong even though I knew I hadn't. I kept thinking about all the things my dad had taught me about what to do if police ever stopped me. Keep your hands visible, don't make sudden movements, be respectful but know your rights. The room was absolutely still. James felt a lump form in his throat. I shouldn't have to know those things just to wait for my dad at an airport, Ty continued. No kid should, but that's the reality for kids who look like me. He paused, looking directly at James for a moment before continuing. When my dad told me about this training program, and that Captain Wilson would be helping with it, I thought that was a good idea. Because what happened that day wasn't just about one person making a mistake. It was about a whole system that needs to change. Ty's composure and eloquence were remarkable for someone his age. James wondered how many difficult conversations with his father had helped shape that maturity. I'm glad something good is coming from what happened to me, Ty concluded. And I hope this training helps everyone remember that before you see someone as a threat, you should first see them as a person. The applause that followed was spontaneous and heartfelt. Dr. Parker placed a proud hand on his son's shoulder as they stood together at the podium. The remainder of the morning unfolded with presentations from security experts, psychologists, and training specialists, each addressing different aspects of the new program. Videos demonstrated proper protocols for approaching individuals in restricted areas, emphasizing communication first, outside enforcement as a last resort. Workshop sessions allowed participants to discuss scenarios and practice applying the new guidelines. During the lunch break, James found himself standing next to Ty at the beverage table. That was quite a speech, James said. Public speaking isn't easy, especially in front of a room full of adults. Ty smiled shyly. My dad helped me practice. He says I might want to be a lawyer someday. You'd be good at it, James replied sincerely. You have a way with words. Ty poured himself some lemonade. My dad says the same thing about you. He says your part of the training program is what makes people actually listen. Before James could respond, Dr. Parker joined them. He's right, he said, having overheard his son's comment. Your willingness to share your perspective honestly has been invaluable, Captain. James, please, James said. After 3 months of working together, the formality seemed unnecessary. Dr. Parker nodded. James, I wanted to let you know that the FAA board has approved the full rollout of the program. Starting next month, it will be implemented at 10 major airports, with the rest to follow by year's end. That's fantastic news, James said. Congratulations. It's a team accomplishment, Dr. Parker replied. Which brings me to something else I wanted to discuss with you. We're forming a permanent advisory committee to oversee the program's implementation and evolution. I'd like you to consider joining it. James was taken aback. Me? But I've fulfilled my commitment to the training development. This isn't about fulfilling a commitment, Dr. Parker said. It's about continuing the important work we've started. Your perspective has proven valuable, and I believe it would continue to be so as we move forward. James glanced at Ty, who was watching the exchange with interest. "What do you think?" he asked the boy. Ty seemed surprised to be consulted. After a moment's thought, he said, "I think you should do it. You understand both sides. Why things go wrong and how to make them right." His simple assessment cut to the heart of the matter. James nodded slowly. "In that case, I'd be honored to join the committee." Dr. Parker extended his hand. "Excellent. We'll be meeting monthly, with the first session scheduled for July." As they shook hands, James felt a sense of coming full circle. What had begun as a moment of terrible judgment had transformed into an opportunity for meaningful change, not just for himself, but potentially for the entire aviation security system. The afternoon session resumed with practical exercises and implementation planning. As James participated, he found himself watching the diverse group of aviation professionals working together, engaging with the material, asking thoughtful questions. Change was happening right before his eyes. At the end of the day, as people gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, Chief Pilot Thompson approached James. "Quite a day," Thompson remarked. "You did well up there." "Thanks," James replied. "It was harder than I expected, but also necessary." Thompson nodded. "You know, when this all started, I wasn't sure how it would play out. Whether you'd learn from it or just go through the motions." "And now?" James asked. "Now I think we all got lucky," Thompson said. "Even Ty, in a way. Because what happened to him happens to kids like him all the time, but rarely does it lead to something like this." He gestured to the training materials being packed up around them. James hadn't thought of it that way before, but Thompson was right. The incident, painful as it had been, had created an opening for change that might not have existed otherwise. As the room emptied, James found himself alone for a moment, looking out the large windows at the airport tarmac below. Planes taxied, to and from gates, ground crews scurried about, the complex dance of aviation continuing as it always had. Except not quite as it always had. Something was different now. A small shift had occurred, one that might ripple outward in ways he couldn't yet imagine. A voice behind him broke into his thoughts. "Ready to go, Captain?" It was Lisa, who had attended the training as an observer. "James," he corrected her with a smile. "At least when we're on the ground." "James, then," she agreed. "That was quite a presentation you gave. Honest." "Had to be," he replied simply. As they walked together toward the exit, Lisa asked, "So what's next for you? Back to the regular flight rotation?" James nodded. "That, and apparently I'm joining Dr. Parker's advisory committee." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Moving up in the world." "Not up," James said thoughtfully. "Forward. There's a difference." Outside, the summer evening was warm and golden. Airport personnel streamed toward parking lots and shuttle stops, many of them having attended the day's training. James wondered what they were thinking, what they would take back to their daily work, whether anything would really change. As if reading his thoughts, Lisa said, "You know it's just the beginning, right? One training program doesn't fix everything." "I know," James agreed. "But it's something, a step in the right direction. And sometimes," he thought as they parted ways in the parking lot, "a step was all you could take at once." The important thing was to keep moving forward, to learn from each misstep, and to help others find their way too. As he drove home, James reflected on how much had changed in 3 months. He still had much to learn, many biases to uncover and address. But for the first time since that morning when he'd made the call that changed everything, he felt a sense of genuine hope, not just for himself, but for the system he was part of. Somewhere across town, Ty Parker was probably telling his father about his experience speaking at the training today. And maybe, just maybe, he was feeling a little safer in the world than he had 3 months ago. That, James thought, would be the true measure of success.